How do you deal with anger? Something we all face. And we want to talk about it here at Painted Porch Strategies. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're not angry in this moment. My name is Rob Hunter, joined by Amy Yakowski and Sierra Ram Cantrell. So, ladies, this Seneca quote in our new Handbook for New Stoics is amazing. So we're on chapter 27. We go through each week and we learn a new lesson. And I love this quote from Seneca. I've been thinking about it all week. Fight hard with yourself, and if you cannot conquer anger, do not let it conquer you. This is how ancient wisdom works. It's still relevant every day. You have begun to get the better of it if it does not show itself, if it is not given vent. So this is a very difficult task because anger, you want, as Seneca points out, you want to rage. And the thought process seems to be to let it out. But Seneca's not saying that. He says, no, it's best to not even let it flare up. So ladies, what did you think of this lesson, this quote from Seneca, and dealing with anger?
I'll go. So I thought it was interesting. And as we went further into the lesson, it got a little bit clearer. But initially when I read this, I originally interpreted it as essentially like suppressing it. Don't let it out, tamp it down. And to me, I was saying, ooh, that could sometimes be problematic. I don't know if that's the best advice because eventually that kettle is going to boil over. However, as he continued going on, obviously, as they do in many of these lessons, it was really reframing it. I think the key thing with this is to not let it become your master. That was the big thing. It's even part of the quote. If we allow it to show itself in our outward appearance, it is our master. And so that was the thing that I really highlighted here. And to finalize it, he says, our inward thoughts gradually become influenced by our outward demeanor. And the way I wrote with that was I said, it's kind of a little bit of fake it till you make it, where yes, initially you're kind of tamping it down, but then over time you're working through that. So it's not a tamp, that you have learned over time to not let it get the better of you, and you're not just sitting there like silently raging. So that was my initial takeaway. What about you, Sierra?
So, Seneca says anger is temporary madness. And that really is true. If you've ever been really angry, you know that sometimes it feels like you can't even see anything else. You're just seeing red, where the expression comes from. And so they're talking about how sometimes when you get angry, it can become like a runaway train, right? So it's like all bets are off, it's on, right? And it can be hard to recover from that. So this does make sense in that if you can take that pause that Rob teaches us always is to take that pause. And maybe does it even really need anger? Do you even need to like start that train down the railroad tracks? I mean, oftentimes you don't. Oftentimes if you just don't even get it started, then it's much easier to stop. It's hard to stop a train.
I love this part at the end because I think that's exactly right. So what they write in this book is that while many of us think that venting anger by acting on it is useful, there is new scientific evidence that suggests the reverse is true. To go back to your point, Amy, is that you feel like you have this anger, you have to let it out somehow. Well, it says there's some evidence to suggest that acting the opposite of anger helps people prone to anger reduce the emotion. So there's two things at play here, I think, that Seneca touches on. Again, this is what, 2,500 years ago or something like that, maybe further away than that Seneca left us these nuggets in his On Anger, which is an entire book that he dedicated to that, is act the opposite. So if you get angry, what can you do to act the opposite of that? And actually, in this lesson, week 27, give us an exercise to ask us what to do. So I've kind of talked to myself about acting like Joe Pesci in Home Alone, because he swears, but he swears in such a ridiculous way. Because Joe Pesci's in gangster movies and he says the F word like all the time, but instead in Home Alone, he's like, and it just sounds like a bunch of noise, and it always makes me laugh. So if I'm sitting there in my head just acting like Joe Pesci after his head got burnt by the blowtorch, I'm gonna laugh. Act the opposite of that.
So is it in some ways kind of putting a mirror up against the perceived anger that you're feeling to try to then laugh it off? Is that what you're doing? Because to Sierra's point and to what Seneca says, it is temporary madness.
Yes.
And they're so often we get angry and we react in a certain way and we feel that it's justified. But how often, I would probably say almost 99% of the time, have we observed other people being unreasonably angry, blinded by rage, right, to use another term, and observe how ridiculous they are acting, they're behaving, and yet somehow we think that when we're angry, it's totally justified.
It's like being around a drunk person. If you're not drunk,
Yes.
you're like, wow, is this what it's like when people are drunk? Because
Right.
The observation is massive.
Well, and how often have we said things or done things in anger that, oof, you really regret, or you really wish you hadn't said? And you know what? Once that train leaves the station, you can try to repair it, but in oftentimes the damage has already been done.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of what this exercise, it's almost like, you know, that saying, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just being like fighting fire with fire or acting angry when you're angry, it's sort of like, you know, you're doing the opposite as in hopes that you are going to influence the emotion. So instead of, you feel really angry, instead of doing the typical angry things like pounding your fist or screaming, instead you get quiet, or you get really calm, or you get like super, super peaceful. And then maybe that flips the script on your emotional state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You like how you flip the script, Rob?
Yeah.
So that's in my course, if you're looking at it.
It's in Rob's course.
But this is part of the course is about how you communicate in different emotional states, because that's really the key to communication. So I have an exercise that we go through recognizing where in your body you feel certain emotions, anger being one of them. So I know I feel it in my jaw. So if I feel this emotional surge that hits me right here, I know that I'm angry. So if I can give myself a pause or a space, oh, I'm recognizing that I have this sensation here that makes me want to yell or punch or something, I can back off of that. I can go, okay, I need to breathe. I need to pause, because that's the other part too, is the techniques that you can figure out for yourself that give you a space so you don't have to react in anger. So you don't have to say something that you're going to regret or say something in anger that is not productive at all.
Mm-hmm. If you want to punch a wall, do the opposite, hug a pillow, right? Or whatever. But that's the whole idea, is creating the opposites. Yeah. Just, and then you'll be fine.
Years and years ago, I worked for a company, and the president emeritus had this exact skill. So when something happened that made anybody angry, right, or made her angry, instead of her screaming, she did something so opposite. There would be a huge pause, and then she would whisper.
Mm.
Oh, which could kind of sometimes be a little off-putting.
With the calmest, slowest, quietest voice. So literally everybody at the table would like lean in, because it was so soft and quiet and slow. And you honestly, you got scared when that happened, because you knew she was really mad when she whispered. But it was exactly the opposite of getting angry. And you listened to her response.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you spoke with a clear mind rather than yelling at everybody, which puts everyone else on the defensive automatically.
Yeah.
So that's a great, and made me think of an old person I used to work with. I won't mention their position, but they didn't last very long in the company that I worked with, because his leadership tactic was to yell at everybody. So he only lasted like 6 or 8 months. And you can hear him, because my office was next to his, and I can hear him berating fellow employees. And I'm like, and he was young. He was a young guy at the time. He was probably like 28, 29, 30 years old. And that was the management technique that he thought was effective, but it's not effective at all. People do not respond to being yelled at very well. No. I mean, if you do it to kids, right, it builds up a natural defense. So you walking on eggshells all the time. And if you want your employees to be like that, they're not going to be productive. They're going to run and hide from you any chance they can get. That's why this lesson is so important, because anger is something we all deal with. I mean, it's an innate human emotion that is a warning signal that your brain sends. For me, I've realized that it's mostly fear, that there's some kind of fear associated to my anger. So my body reacts to try to be offensive rather than be in a fear state, especially behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah.
Which is where I've been doing my work, because that's where I get the most angry.
In your car. Yeah. Is that anything to do with you being from Boston?
Probably. Probably because we don't even know how to say the word car. Car.
That's a big obstacle right there.
So
I do want to add one thing. When I initially read this, I didn't connect with it because I don't get angry very often. Angry, capital A.
Okay.
I don't get angry very often. However, I did realize that, anger is just the primary. That's the big emotion. But there are so many sub emotions underneath that. And the things that I experience often, which no one who's been participating in these calls would be surprised at, is frustration, disappointment, aggravation. Those are the things that I experience, and they are just a derivative of anger.
Yes.
I'm angry, it's just in a different way. It's not capital A, blind rage, pulsing vein, angry. It's different, but still it's ultimately the same. So I just wanted to point that out, that when we talk about anger, it really is any variation of that, which has a cacophony of different emotions that are tied to it, that you even point out, Sierra, in your program. So
yeah.
So for me, I had to rethink it and go, oh, okay. It's really, for me, when it's frustration, aggravation, disappointment, agitation, those things.
Yeah. So what did they have us do? This was a multi-step exercise this week. They had us thinking about when are we going to implement? What are first we had to come up with some ideas of what relaxes and refreshes your mind that you can easily incorporate into your daily routine. So for me, I came up with, this shouldn't be any surprise, my garden, fresh air, time in nature, and quiet. I like when things are on the quieter side versus like a million TVs on and lots of noise.
Yeah. Yeah, because they did talk about a couple different things. You can try to catch it, catch the anger, because they talk about different phases, but catch the anger before it gets out into the world. And, they had a couple different intentions. It could be true, just walking away, that they call, cognitive distancing, walking away from it, taking that pause, and then even being that obvious about it and saying, I'm going to think about this again in 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to walk away. And then, by the time the timer goes off, you're like, yeah, I'm fine. It's fine.
And that'll shrink.
I don't want to think about it.
The more you do it, the more the time shrinks. So it will be 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes. Eventually you'll be able to do it in 90 seconds.
Yeah. So for me, I wrote walk away, take a few deep breaths, / like a dragon breath. As you mentioned, Sierra, in your program, playing music is a great one just to shake it up. It gets me out of that state. I pivot to something else, and then doing a little bit of pre-meditation.
Whereas mine is all about the pause, finding ways to give myself a pause, but it's really that recognition when I feel it in my body, like, oh, that's an automatic trigger for me to take a pause because I'm about to say something nasty. So I want one final takeaway. How would you advise others? I know we talked about our methods. Any other advice for someone that might be dealing with anger so they can deal with it like a Stoic, like Seneca suggests?
I would say, I think the view from above is helpful, like to think of it in the bigger picture of things, like in the grand scheme of things, is this really a big deal or is it trivial?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is set an intention, have it pre-planned. That's a big thing with the Stoics, both with premeditating on what could go wrong, pre-planning for that, but also having the intention. They even talk about it specifically in here. What is going to be your cue? How are you going to notice when that anger starts to bubble up? And then what techniques are you going to have in place that you can employ in that moment. And it's really just creating that connection between the cue, the trigger, and then the follow-up action. I think that's a key.
So let us know what you have come up with. We'd love it if you follow along with us. A handbook for new Stoics. We're past the halfway point, week number 27. On to week 28 next, which is an interesting one because it's called Put the Sage on Your Shoulder. I don't know what that is. I'm curious to dig in. Hope that you will dig in with us. So the point of doing this is because we are Stoics and we've embraced the Stoic philosophy.
Stoics
yes, and we always are. We always will be, right? The point is that we do here at Painted Porch Strategies is implore some of these for some modern world techniques to help you be a little bit more mindful and a lot more mindful, to help you communicate a little bit more effectively and to work more effectively as a team. That is our mission. We would love to work on that mission with you to coincide with your mission. So reach out to us here at Painted Porch Strategies, join our virtual book club, follow these lessons along with us, and come on in and say hi. For Sierra, for Amy, for Rob, we'll see you next time right here on the porch.